When I asked what day the wedding was, she smiled like I'd missed a joke and whispered, "It was yesterday, just for special people." In that moment, I realized I wasn't one of them. The kettle clicked off in the quiet of the kitchen, but no one moved to pour the tea. Margaret sat at the window, staring at the empty street. The steam fogged the glass, blurring the world beyond, just like her memories of Daniel as a little boy. His sticky fingers, his lopsided drawings taped to the fridge, the way he used to say, "Mommy, wait for me," like she was the only safe place in the world. Now he was 32, and she didn't know if she was even on his guest list. Her phone buzzed, a group message from her book club, and for a moment, her heart leapt. Maybe it was Daniel. Maybe he finally remembered to tell her when the wedding was. But it wasn't him. It was Anne, sharing a picture of her grandson's graduation, smiling, present, proud. Margaret sighed and turned the kettle back on. The tea had gone cold again. Earlier that week, she'd asked Daniel casually, so casual it hurt, "So, have you two picked the date yet?" He'd smiled without showing teeth. "Yeah, we're close, just trying to work out the guest list. You know how it is." She did not. She never had a wedding. She and Richard had eloped in Vegas during a layover. And now Richard was gone, dead 5 years next month. And Daniel was the only family she had left. She didn't say that. She just nodded and said, "Of course." 3 days later, she saw the pictures. A friend from church sent her a message. "Didn't know your son was getting married this weekend. They looked amazing." Her blood ran cold. Her fingers fumbled across her phone until she found it. Daniel's new wife, Alyssa, in a sleek white gown. The caption read, "Intimate vows, just those closest to our hearts." There were 27 people in the group photo. She wasn't one of them. She waited. Maybe he would call. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But 3 days passed. And then she saw them, Daniel and Alyssa, at the grocery store. She froze in the frozen food aisle, torn between approaching or vanishing. He looked surprised. "Mom." Alyssa didn't even look up from her phone. Margaret's voice came out smaller than she wanted. "When's the wedding?" Alyssa finally looked up, her eyes cool. "Oh," she said, almost with pity. "It was yesterday, just for special people." And then she turned away. Margaret stood there, holding a bag of peas she didn't need, her hands trembling. It was as if she'd just been erased, not shouted at, not scolded. Worse, dismissed. Hi, my beautiful family. I have missed you all. Thank you so for sticking around with me. I truly appreciate your love and support. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story, just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. Margaret didn't drive straight home from the grocery store. She sat in the parking lot with her hands still on the wheel, the engine off, the frozen peas melting beside her. The words looped through her mind like a cruel song lyric she couldn't shake. Just for special people. What did that even mean? What made her not special? She'd spent her life trying to be a good mother, quiet, supportive. She hadn't interfered when Daniel moved in with Alyssa, even though she'd wanted to. She hadn't protested when he spent holidays with Alyssa's family instead. She had accepted scraps and called it love. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan spin, the shadows on the wall dancing like memories. She thought of Daniel's first loose tooth, his graduation day, his first heartbreak, the way he clung to her after his father's funeral. Had she been special then? Or had she always been invisible? The next morning, she put on her nicest coat, the burgundy one Richard had bought her 10 years ago, and went to the florist. Something warm, she told the clerk, and proud. The young woman blinked. Proud? Yes, she said softly. Like forgiveness wrapped in dignity. She left with a bouquet of deep yellow roses, white lilies, and eucalyptus. The scent filled the car like memory. She knocked on the door of Daniel's condo. No one answered. She knocked again, harder. Still, nothing. She almost left the flowers there, but something in her, something tired of being left behind, refused. Instead, she tucked a card inside the bouquet. It said, "Congratulations. I hope your new family brings you peace. Love, Mom." And then in tiny print at the bottom, "Was I ever special?" That night, a soft knock startled her from the couch. It was Daniel, alone. He looked older than she remembered, paler. He didn't meet for eyes. He said, "I got your flowers. Thank you." Margaret nodded but said nothing. She couldn't trust her voice not to betray her. He hesitated. "Mom, I wanted to invite you. I did. But Alyssa," she stopped. "She didn't want me there," Margaret said flatly. He looked ashamed. "She said you'd make it about yourself, that you always do." Margaret's breath caught. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," he said. "She has this idea of you from that one dinner, remember? You asked her if she was still in therapy, and she said you embarrassed her in front of her friends. I was trying to connect, not shame her." "I know," he whispered. There it was, the spark. Not a fire of rage, but something more dangerous. The ache of misremembered intentions. The fear that everything she had done to love him had somehow been twisted into something ugly. "I just wanted to be there, to see my son get married." Daniel nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I know." Then he added, barely audible, "She doesn't know her real mother. She was adopted. She has walls." Margaret blinked. Something sharp shifted in her chest. The anger didn't disappear, but it tangled with curiosity, with grief, with something else. Compassion? He didn't stay long. When he left, he touched her shoulder lightly, like an apology without words. And when the door shut behind him, Margaret stood in the silence, not healed, not whole, but no longer in the dark. Something sharp shifted in her chest. The anger didn't disappear, but it tangled with curiosity, with grief, with something else. Compassion? He didn't stay long. When he left, he touched her shoulder lightly, like an apology without words. And when the door shut behind him, Margaret stood in the silence, not healed, not whole, but no longer in the dark. If you think Margaret should try harder to understand Alyssa, or should she set boundaries and protect herself, let me know your take in the comments below. I'm curious how you see it. Margaret didn't reach out the next day, or the day after that. She didn't know what to say, and worse, she didn't know if she had the strength to hear another cold word from Alyssa. There were only so many times a heart could be told it was unwanted before it stopped trying. She poured her morning coffee slower now, less hopeful. She stopped checking her phone every hour, but the silence still screamed. Daniel sent a message on the third day. "We're back from the honeymoon. Alyssa said thanks for the flowers." She stared at the screen. That was it? No invitation? No apology? Just a polite, lukewarm thank you, filtered through someone else. She typed and deleted her reply 3 times. She finally sent, "I'm glad it was beautiful." It felt like swallowing a rock. That afternoon, she opened the hallway closet to grab an umbrella and found the box she hadn't seen in years. Daniel's baby clothes, the tiny lion-footed pajamas, the stuffed giraffe with one missing eye, his first birthday card from Richard, now yellowed at the edges. She sank to the hallway floor, holding the giraffe, her fingers tracing the worn seam. She loved him so hard, so deep. Where had all that love gone? How could he forget it? Meanwhile, across town, Alyssa stood in the middle of their apartment, arms crossed, watching Daniel water our dying houseplant. She asked, "You saw her?" "Yeah," Daniel said carefully. "She sent the flowers to make you feel guilty?" He turned. "She sent them to congratulate us. She's manipulative, Daniel. You know that." He frowned. "No, I think she's just hurt." Alyssa's lips tightened. "You don't know what it's like to be watched, judged, made to feel broken." "I don't think that's what she meant," Daniel said gently. "You weren't in the room," Alyssa snapped. "You didn't see the way she looked at me that night, like I was a project, like I needed fixing?" Daniel didn't answer, and that silence said everything. Later that night, Daniel sat on the edge of their bed, scrolling through old pictures on his phone. He stopped on one of Margaret and him, taken 10 years ago at a beach. She was laughing. He was sunburnt and covered in sand, hugging him from behind. She looked so alive, so present. What had changed? Was Alyssa right? Or had they both built versions of Margaret that weren't real? Margaret, meanwhile, sat at her piano. She hadn't played in months. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and let out a soft note, then another. The sound filled the quiet apartment like breath. She remembered the song she used to hum when Daniel had nightmares, the one that always brought him back to sleep. She played it slowly, and for the first time in days, she wept. Can two people forgive each other when neither feels heard? Have you ever tried to bridge that kind of gap? Tell me, what broke it or what healed it? It started with a phone call Margaret almost didn't answer. It was Daniel. "Hey," he said, "listen, could you do me a favor?" She waited. "It's Dad's birthday this weekend. I know it's not a big thing anymore, but I was thinking maybe we could all have dinner at your place, just something small." Her breath caught. "All?" He added, "Alyssa too, if that's okay." Margaret's throat tightened. "Of course," she said. He liked that. She spent the next 2 days cleaning every surface in her apartment, not for Daniel, but for Alyssa. She wanted the place to smell like lemon polish and fresh bread. She wanted it to feel warm, inviting, unimpeachable. She made Richard's favorite meal, roasted rosemary chicken with garlic potatoes and glazed carrots. And she bought a small, elegant chocolate cake with gold icing. She didn't realize until she set it on the table that it looked like a wedding cake. They arrived 10 minutes late. Daniel looked nervous. Alyssa wore dark lipstick and a black turtleneck, like she dressed for battle, not dinner. Margaret smiled anyway. "Come in," she said. "It's good to see you." Alyssa nodded politely, barely meeting her eyes. "Thanks for having us." The air was tight. Daniel tried to keep the conversation going. Safe topics, weather, work. Margaret answered with grace, but the silences between words felt like cliffs. Finally, as they sat down to eat, Margaret asked, "How was the honeymoon?" Alyssa stiffened. Daniel jumped in. "It was nice, quiet. We went upstate, rented a cabin." Margaret smiled. "That sounds lovely." Alyssa's fork scraped her plate. It was peaceful. There it was again, the undercurrent, the subtle jab. Margaret inhaled slowly. She could say nothing, Or she could ask the question she hadn't dared ask since the grocery store. She chose the latter. "I hope I didn't offend you," she said quietly, looking at Alyssa. "At dinner. That night you say I embarrassed you." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. Alyssa put her fork down. Her voice was cool. "I don't think you meant to, but it felt judgmental. You asked about therapy like it was gossip." Margaret blinked. "I asked because I know how hard it is. Richard never believed in therapy. I thought, maybe you needed someone to say it's okay to need help." The words hung there as fragile as spun glass. Alyssa didn't respond right away. Then she said, softly, "I didn't know that." After dinner, Daniel excused himself to take a work call. Margaret and Alyssa stood in the kitchen, the silence louder than before. Margaret opened the fridge and pulled out the cake. "Would you like a slice?" Alyssa hesitated. "Sure." She cut 2 small pieces and handed one to Alyssa. They ate standing at the counter like strangers waiting for a bus. Then Alyssa spoke. "We had a cake like this," she said, almost to herself, "at the wedding." Margaret's hand froze on her fork. Alyssa looked down. "We had a whole extra tier. Daniel wanted to save some for you. He asked if we could bring it over after the honeymoon." "Why didn't you bring it?" Margaret asked. "I said no. I told him it would be weird, that if you wanted to be part of it, you would have made more of an effort before." Margaret's voice was quiet. "I didn't know how to." Alyssa shrugged. "Neither did I." They didn't look at each other, but for the first time, something unspoken passed between them. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. Have you ever had to share a room with someone who hurt you or someone you hurt? What did you say or leave unsaid? Share your story in the comments. It might help someone else. 2 days after the dinner, Margaret found herself alone again. The silence didn't sting as sharply. It felt quieter, not peace, but maybe the first breath after drowning. She was putting away the last of the wine glasses when her phone pinged. Daniel. "Hey, Alyssa left something behind the other night. Mind if I swing by to grab it?" She replied, "Of course, I'll be home." 10 minutes later, there was a knock. But it wasn't Daniel. It was Alyssa. Margaret tried not to show her surprise. "She's shy," Alyssa said with a dry smile, "but direct." Margaret stepped aside. "Come in." Alyssa walked slowly, looking around the room like she was seeing it properly for the first time. "This was Daniel's room, right?" she asked, nodding toward the hallway. Margaret smiled. "Until he was 14, then he outgrew it." A beat of silence. "I used to dream of having a room like this," Alyssa said softly. "A room with shelves and drawings and a parent who remembered what it looked like." Margaret's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Alyssa hesitated. Her voice dropped. "I grew up in foster care." Margaret blinked. "I thought you were adopted." "I was, eventually. But not early, and not gently." Alyssa sat on the edge of the sofa, eyes distant. "I was bounced between houses, some good, some not. I learned to survive by reading people, by staying quiet, smiling when I needed to, leaving before I was left." Margaret sat down across from her, heart suddenly heavy. "I had no idea." Alyssa gave a short, bitter laugh. "That's the point. I got really good at hiding it. I didn't even tell Daniel everything." Margaret's voice was gentle. You told me I looked at you like you were broken. Maybe I did, but not because I saw weakness, because I saw myself." Alyssa looked up, startled. Margaret leaned back. "I didn't grow up with much love either. Not the kind that hugs you. My mother believed emotion was weakness. When I married Richard, I thought I was choosing safety, and for a while I was. But he wasn't soft, not with Daniel. He never forgave me for spoiling him, as he called it." "I thought Daniel said his dad was kind," Alyssa said cautiously. Margaret looked down. "He was complicated. Daniel never saw the coldness. I took it all on myself so he didn't have to." For a long moment, they sat in silence, just two women holding histories they'd both tried to bury. Then Alyssa said something Margaret never expected to hear. "I didn't hate you. I was afraid of you." Margaret blinked. "Afraid?" "You looked like everything I wanted to become, but didn't think I could," Alyssa said. "I knew how to speak without apologizing, how to claim a room. I've never had that. I don't know how to belong in a family." Margaret felt something shift inside her, a cracking open, not of pain, but of recognition. She got up, walked to the bookshelf, and pulled out a small leather photo album. It was old, worn, filled with fading Polaroids and slightly blurry snapshots. She handed it to Alyssa. "These were the years no one else saw," Margaret said. "The scraped knees, the nightmares, the birthdays where we had one candle and a broken toy." Alyssa turned the pages slowly. Daniel in a kiddie pool, Margaret holding him in a towel, Margaret and Richard on their wedding day, both unsmiling. Then a photo that made Alyssa pause. A young Margaret, maybe early 30s, holding Daniel tightly, her face streaked with tears, Daniel asleep on her shoulder. "This was after his appendix surgery," Margaret said softly. "He was 7. He was so scared. Richard didn't come. He said hospitals were for the weak." Alyssa traced the edge of the photo. And then she said, barely above a whisper, "I think I made a mistake." It was a week before Christmas when Margaret got the unexpected knock. Again, it wasn't Daniel. It was Alyssa, holding a small potted pine tree in her gloved hands. "I figured you didn't get a tree this year," she said, cheeks flushed from the cold. "And this one's small. Thought it might keep you company." Margaret blinked, then smiled. "You want to come in?" They set the tree on the table by the window. Alyssa brushed her hands together, warming them over her tea. "I used to hate the holidays. Too many homes, too many people pretending." Margaret stirred sugar into her mug. "I used to love them, but after Richard passed and after Daniel moved out, it felt like decorating for ghosts." They shared a look. Not pity, not apology. Something else. Understanding. Margaret stood. "Do you mind if I play something?" Alyssa nodded, curious. Margaret moved to the piano, its surface still shiny, though the keys were slightly yellowed with age. She sat down, flexed her fingers, and began to play the old lullabies she used to hum to Daniel. Soft, lilting, the kind of melody that could stitch up a frayed soul. Alyssa closed her eyes. "I remember this," she whispered. Margaret looked at her. "Daniel told you?" A nod. "He said you used to play it whenever he had nightmares. He said it felt like you wrapped the whole room in it." Margaret swallowed hard. It was the only thing I knew how to give when words didn't work. They sat in silence as the notes faded. Then Alyssa stood, walked slowly to the piano, and placed something beside a framed photo of Daniel. It was a small, glass figurine, a ballerina, her arms curved above her head. I had this when I was 6. It was the only thing I carried through all the houses. One foster mother smashed it. But I found a replica last year. I've never given it to anyone before. Margaret stared at the figure, stunned. Alyssa, you don't have to keep it, Alyssa said quickly. It's just, I guess I'm trying. Margaret touched her hand. You're more like family to me now than you've ever been, and I see you. Alyssa didn't pull away. Her eyes filled. Thank you. They talked that afternoon. For the first time, really talked. About grief, about Daniel, about shame and silence, and all the things that live between women trying to build peace on top of rubble. And somewhere between tea and twilight, something shifted. Not loudly, but truly. Before Alyssa left, she turned at the door. Would you want to come over next week for dinner? Margaret blinked. You're inviting me? Alyssa smiled. Well, only if you're one of the special people. Margaret laughed. And this time, it didn't hurt. Act 7. I wasn't enough, was I? Margaret stood in the kitchen, humming softly as she packed the lemon tart she'd baked for dinner at Daniel and Alyssa's place, her first official invitation since that day. She wore soft, rose-colored lipstick and a navy blouse. She even curled her hair, just a little. She told herself it wasn't to impress anyone, but the mirror knew better. This mattered. She mattered. The door was unlocked when she arrived. Laughter floated out, warm and casual. It stopped the second she stepped in. Daniel stood in the dining room laughing with a woman she didn't recognize. Tall, blonde, young. Oh, Daniel said, surprised. Mom, you're early. Alyssa appeared from the hallway, a little too quickly. Her eyes flicked to Margaret's hands, the pie box, then to her face. This is Jess, Daniel's old friend from college. She's in town for the week. Jess smiled politely. It's so nice to finally meet you. Margaret smiled back, but something inside her curled, not in jealousy, but in warning. There was something in the air, tension Alyssa was trying hard to mask. Dinner was fine. Except it wasn't. Alyssa barely looked up at her plate. Daniel laughed too loudly. Jess tried, too hard, to fill the gaps. Margaret offered compliments, offered seconds, tried to ask questions, but each one landed like a rock in water. It was halfway through dessert that it happened. She reached into her bag to pull out a small velvet pouch. Inside, a bracelet. Gold, simple. A gift for Alyssa. I thought this might go well with that sweater you wore the other day, Margaret said gently, placing it beside Alyssa's plate. Alyssa froze. Daniel looked at her, and then Alyssa stood, abruptly. I'm just gonna clear the dishes. She gathered plates and disappeared into the kitchen. Margaret followed quietly,
her heart pounding. Alyssa stood with her back turned, gripping the counter. "I didn't mean to upset you," Margaret said softly. Alyssa didn't turn. "You didn't." Margaret stepped closer. "Then why are you shaking?" Silence. Then, "Because it's too much. All of it. The bracelet, the dinner, you acting like I didn't shut you out? Like we're suddenly a Hallmark movie?" Margaret stiffened. "I'm not acting." Alyssa turned, eyes wet and furious. "You're pretending. Pretending you still blame me. Pretending like all it took was one conversation, and now I get to have a mother?" Margaret swallowed. "You don't want one?" Alyssa's voice cracked. "I don't know how to have one."
Silence. Even Jess stood frozen in the hallway. Alyssa looked at Daniel, then at Margaret. Her next words were a whisper. "I was never enough for anyone. Not to stay, not to choose. I thought maybe, just maybe, you were different. But you only want me when I behave, when I don't push too hard, when I stay pleasant." Margaret's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Alyssa took a shaky breath. "I don't need your pity. I don't need bracelets. I don't need to be adopted by my husband's mother just to feel worthy." She shoved past Margaret, and just like that, the door slammed behind her. Margaret stood there stunned. Daniel exhaled, long and low. "I'm sorry," he said. "She's not okay." Margaret whispered, "Neither am I." Then she picked up the velvet pouch and tucked it back into her purse. "I just wanted to give her something that didn't ask anything in return." Daniel looked pained. "She's not ready to believe anyone means that." That night, Margaret lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, the same way she had the night after the wedding. The piano stayed silent. The tree had wilted. The little ballerina figurine still sat on her mantel, mocking her now. Maybe some people were just not meant to be mothers to anyone but their own children, and maybe not even that. Have you ever tried to love someone who didn't know how to accept it? Did you keep trying or walk away? What's the right thing to do when someone pushes you out while needing you in? I want to know your thoughts. It had been 3 days since Alyssa left that kitchen. 3 days of silence. 3 days of no texts, no calls, no signs. Margaret didn't bake. She didn't play the piano. She didn't call Daniel. She sat by the window most afternoons, the winter light silvering the edges of her thoughts, replaying every word, every breath from that night. "You only want me when I behave." Was it true? Had she loved Alyssa conditionally? Had she expected too much too fast? Or was she just trying? Meanwhile, in their apartment across town, Alyssa stared at the ballerina figurine Margaret had once accepted with grace. She had gone back to retrieve it after she stormed out. She hadn't known why at the time, but now she realized it mattered. That gesture, that gift, that memory she thought was too fragile to ever share. And Margaret hadn't mocked it. She hadn't even questioned it. Alyssa ran her finger over the glass skirt and whispered, "I don't know how to do this." Daniel stood in the doorway. "She's not angry," he said softly. Alyssa didn't look up. "She's just hurt." Alyssa shook her head. "I can't promise I won't mess it up again." Daniel sat beside her. "Neither can she." Silence. Then, "I don't want a mother. I want, I don't know, a place, a person who doesn't flinch when I flinch." Daniel smiled.
She flinched and stayed. That night, Margaret opened her phone. She stared at the blank message box, typed something, deleted it, typed again, paused. She didn't send it. Instead, she walked to the door and left the porch light on. The next morning, it snowed. Soft, quiet, unannounced. Margaret made tea for two, just in case.
She sat at the kitchen table, her cup warming her hands, her eyes flicking toward the door every few minutes. Still nothing. She should stop waiting. But she didn't. Alyssa stood at the bottom of the steps to Margaret's apartment for 10 full minutes. The snow gathered in her hair. She didn't knock, but the door opened anyway. Margaret had been watching. They stood in the doorway for a long time. No words, just the sound of the wind. Margaret's voice was soft when it came. I didn't send the message. I didn't know what to say. Alyssa's reply was barely a whisper. Me neither. Margaret opened the door wider. Alyssa stepped in. She took off her coat and hung it on the hook beside Margaret's. Then she pulled something from her pocket. The velvet pouch. The bracelet. She set it on the table. I want to try again. Margaret looked at it, then at her. I was hoping you'd say that. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. But Margaret made more tea, and Alyssa stayed until the snow stopped. And when she left, she said, next time, you come to us. And Margaret nodded. Spring came slowly that year, a hesitant thaw, as if even nature didn't want to rush things. Margaret had just stepped outside to water the tiny pine tree Alyssa had given her, now replanted in a large pot and blooming new green needles, when her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Hey, Alyssa wants to host Mother's Day this year. She asked if you'd come early, just the two of you. Margaret stared at the screen for a long moment. Then she smiled. When she arrived that Sunday, Alyssa opened the door with a tentative smile. There were no grand gestures, no candles or banners or fancy cakes. Just tea. Lavender, the kind Margaret had mentioned once, in passing. I hope this is still your favorite, Alyssa said, setting the cup down. It is, Margaret replied. She noticed a small wrapped box on the table, but didn't mention it yet. Instead, she looked around the apartment. The ballerina figurine was now on a high shelf, not hidden away, but displayed. Quiet pride. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled something wrapped in tissue. She handed it to Alyssa. Inside was an old photo, the one from the beach, Margaret laughing, Daniel covered in sand. Alyssa smiled. He showed me this once. Margaret nodded. I thought maybe you'd like it. After tea, Alyssa finally pushed the gift toward her. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small wooden box, handcrafted, carved with vines and initials. M.W. A.B. Inside the box was the bracelet. Not just the one Margaret had given her, but another one, almost identical. 2 pieces, 2 matching halves. Alyssa spoke softly. I had it made. One for you, one for me. Not because we're perfect, or because we got it all right, but because we tried, and I think trying should count for something. Margaret's throat closed. Her fingers trembled as she held the bracelet. It fit perfectly. That evening, Daniel joined them for dinner. They laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in what felt like years. Alyssa told stories from her childhood that made them wince and smile in the same breath. Margaret told one about Daniel gluing Cheerios to the cat when he was 4. And for a moment, the air felt full again. Not just with sound, but with belonging. After dinner, Alyssa quietly stepped into the hallway and returned with something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it and handed it to Margaret. It was a small photo frame. Inside, a candid photo taken just hours ago, the 3 of them at the table, Daniel mid-laugh, Margaret pouring tea, Alyssa half smiling at them both. Underneath, handwritten in gold ink, were the words, "Just for special people." Margaret blinked rapidly. This time, those words didn't sting. They healed. As the evening wound down, Alyssa stood beside the door, hands tucked into her sleeves. Margaret placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know I'll never replace what you lost," she said. Alyssa looked at her. "You didn't replace it. You became something new." They hugged. For the first time, not cautiously, but completely. What does family mean to you? Is it blood, or is it the people who choose you? If you've ever found love in an unexpected place, share your story below. Someone out there might need to hear that it's possible. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.